Welcome to the Did Nothing Wrong podcast, where we try to cut through the noise and help you make sense of the chaotic information space around us. I'm Griff Somke.
And I'm Jay McKenzie.
Our guest today is Amanda Moore, a journalist who spent a year undercover within the overlapping MAGA, QAnon, and white nationalist movements, who surely gained a considerable number of enemies in the process. She used the information she gleaned from her work undercover to supply information and secret recordings to journalists covering the extreme right. She's since then branched out with her own work, including an excellent piece for Talking Points Memo on the Nick Fuentes and Kanye, or Ye, West alliance. You can find her newsletter, The Turtle Diaries, at noturtlesoup17.substack.com, and her Twitter account is noturtlesoup17. If you like what you're hearing, please make sure to subscribe to the newsletter at didnothingwrongpod.com. And if you're listening to us on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, or Spotify, please give us a 5-star rating. We've got a great show for you today. Thanks for joining us. Amanda, thanks for being here, and welcome to Did Nothing Wrong.
Thanks for having me.
You have done a lot of really interesting stuff in the last couple of years, and this is fun. This is something I'm looking forward to hearing about.
Yeah, same here.
Yeah, you managed to make a lot of new friends. Right.
Yeah.
So, to start, I just wanted to say, it's easy to say that QAnon is crazy and white nationalism is bad from a distance, but when you were in this world and hearing this rhetoric every day, surely it had some kind of effect on you. How did you avoid getting sucked into the right-wing conspiracies when you heard them every day? Was it easy, or did you have to constantly keep your guard up to some degree?
So I was actually raised evangelical. My dad's like super religious. His church that he goes to now, his pastor raises people from the dead. Oh. And they actually, they actually hosted one of the QAnon events I was supposed to go to.
Huh.
Yeah. Andrew Womack in Colorado Springs. It's like a mega church. So my dad's like local to DC, but they've got like little campuses all over the place. So, I've already had that. And then I was a Ron Paul libertarian.
Ah. So
I think the white nationalism and conspiracy ship kind of would have already sailed if it was going to happen with me. So I think that excessive exposure to both of those worlds kind of made it. I mean, it's just it wasn't anything new, it's just the same shit I was hearing 10 years ago.
Right. So you kind of feel like maybe you got immunized a little bit to some of what you were hearing because this is just what these people on this side of the fence say when they're talking.
Yeah. I mean, I was in cop block, which Christopher Cantwell, I was involved in cop block protests here and everything. Yeah. And so there's very little separation, on a personal level, people that we knew between me and him. In fact, I had to deactivate my Facebook for many reasons when I was undercover. But one of those was I was like, oh my God, some of these guys, we know people in common because we all came up in that Ron Paul libertarian movement. And so it's just, I don't know what it is about me that made me go left and made them go right. But it happened. And it happens. It's not just me, right? There's
no.
Yeah.
But it's on the far left as there are on the far right, perhaps. But there's certainly a number of us.
That's really fascinating that you bring up the Ron Paul thing, because there was so much of a pipeline from Ron Paul into the far right, into the white nationalist movement. It's a little terrifying, really.
You could be a Ron Paul libertarian who went Tim Pool's way and left, and then still saying you're left, but actually right. So there's all sorts of ways that people go. I think most of the Ron Paul libertarians probably went the way of Tucker. It's pretty straight, seamless line, but yeah, not for you, huh?
And I will say, obviously, I created a personality. I did not change my actual personality. I'm loud. I'm, I swear. I was never gonna go into this and be I'm gonna act like a trad wife. It wouldn't have worked. I couldn't have done it. So I was just me. But I was what is the fascist version of me I would have become? And I was I would have been a Richard Spencer Nazi. And so that was what I went into this with. And so I don't know if it's that or my age or what exactly, but that's exactly what I attracted. So every person I befriended on the white nationalism side was from that Ron Paul background. 100% of them. I mean, they were all in their late 20s or early to mid 30s, so it might be that too, but we were all Ron or Rand Paul libertarians.
Wow.
Do you feel like you know why they went more extreme or what appealed to them, or is that just where the energy was flowing?
I don't know. I mean, I think about this a lot lately because I really just don't have any like good answers on this, because it's also, as I'm writing about it, it's a lot of like self-reflection. So I know for me, when Michael Brown was killed in Ferguson, and I was in these, Black Lives Matter marches in DC and, wherever, I'm looking around, it's a bunch of leftists. And then when it happens like closer to home in Baltimore, Freddie Gray, it's like everybody I used to know in Coppell, I mean, not everybody, but a lot of them are like, what about the highways' rights? You can't be on the highway. And it's like, fuck you. Like, I thought we cared about this. It's like, obviously, you don't. You care about it when it's convenient for you. And so that was like my breaking point. But obviously there was like a big Trumpism takeover of the entire party. Like, I want to be very clear. I almost ran for school board, a libertarian ticket. Like, I was involved in the party. So yeah, I really don't know what made some people go one way and me go another.
Well, in Ollie Breland's piece about your time undercover for Mother Jones, he mentions how you noticed that far-right groups will show up across the street and hold their own version of these more mainstream events, like what we see from TPUSA. Did you get the sense that the more mainstream GOP groups ever did anything to discourage this? Did they really seem to care that they had these fringe extremist groups across the street, or did this seem like maybe they were coordinating it to some degree?
They're not coordinating it on a like technical sense, but they're certainly, they're certainly benefiting from it, and they are aware. And they are, at best, I would say, providing cover, for it. So some of these events, the guys I knew, a group called Republicans for National Renewal, they would put on, after I was, doxxed, they had this event at Turning Point USA in Phoenix. And, they have, like, James O'Keefe, like, showing up. They have the official Turning Point USA brand ambassadors showing up. There's literally no difference. And then they also have actual documented, like, neo-Nazis. I mean, everybody benefits. The extremist groups benefit from the mainstream's presence. The mainstream groups benefit because they want to appeal to a new, younger audience. And it's like, that is,
Right. And that's where they're finding it.
They want as much attention and press, I guess, as they can get. And it certainly doesn't hurt.
Yeah.
So I know you deal with TPUSA, which is a group that at least now tries to go out of their way to say, oh, we're pro-Israel, we're not anti-Semitic and all this. But then you have this group across the street that's like very obviously anti-Semitic. Did you get a sense or hear from some of these people, like, how do they square that? We're not exactly on the same team, but we're kind of okay with it. Or was it kind of, I know there's some white nationalists who are kind of pro-Israel, but we're okay with Jews, but not if they're here, like go to your own country sort of thing. Is that kind of uniform? Does everybody have their own idea about it? Do they not talk about it?
So very, very nuanced question. So when you've got, Israel is like very controversial on the left, right? Like this is also like an issue that we deal with. I mean, like according to the ADL, I'm extremely anti-Semitic because, I believe that Palestinian people have the right to exist. So whatever. So it's just as complicated in many ways on the right. You've got people who are, my line was like, I'm fine with Israel existing because like the Jews should have a place to go that isn't here. And I chose that because it was like a common enough line that like I didn't have to go in any more detail on my opinions on that. Right. And then obviously I think on the more extremist side, you do primarily have people who are like, I do not want to fund Israel. What gets very interesting is when you have people who are like in these groups and then they're Jewish and then they also support Israel. And it's kind of like everyone just turns a blind eye to it and like pretends like, it's like, oh yeah, that's great. And that's your thing. That's your little thing. Because, you're Jewish. We get it. So Nick Fuentes, he had like this Groyper war with Turning Point USA back in 2019. And one of the questions that your question, if you think of, one of the guys stood up. So what these Groypers would do, which is the name that everybody uses for the people who follow Nick Fuentes, they would get in line to ask questions, and they would ask extremely controversial questions, or they would try to expose the audience to extremist ideas that Turning Point USA would not expose them to. One of them is like he's got like a little Israel button on, and he gets up and he's like, Charlie Kirk, I heard, you were just in Jerusalem and I love Israel. And, I heard Israelis, they make the best dancers. Mm-hmm. And he was like, and you can Google dancing Israelis if you don't believe me. And so obviously I think you two, your reaction indicates, you know what I'm talking about.
I've seen that clip. Yes.
A very stupid conspiracy theory. And so you'll get stuff like that. Like, it's like, oh, well, we can just kind of like inoculate people a little bit. And by the time they're over here, we can say more stuff across the street. And then by the time they go home, we can really just pound it, into their heads through social media.
Right.
This is so far beyond like what the donors to TPUSA or any of these groups would get, and it works. They're really clever about stuff like that, where it's you get somebody to Google something, and maybe that's the way they get admitted in. That's why they start asking more questions. That's very clever in a terrible sort of way, but you see why they do this.
And that's Nick Fuentes, definitely clever in a terrible sort of way. Good with this kind of thing. And speaking of Nick Fuentes, you did write a really great piece in Talking Points memo about the danger of the Nick Fuentes and the Kanye or Ye West alliance. For us, it seems like Fuentes is an immediate danger in some ways, but what's potentially more concerning is his long-term trajectory. Do you see Fuentes playing any kind of a central role in the 2024 election cycle?
I don't know. It's very interesting. So I know he said on his show, maybe like yesterday, that they're about to make some kind of announcement in regard to the political stuff, because they so far have not been able to call it a campaign because he's not officially filed. And I said, well, there's legal reasons we have to wait for Ye to file. So it looks like they're going to make some kind of announcement. I have no idea what it could be. It could be like announcement, Ye actually loves Stalin more than he loves Hitler. Like, who knows? Like with these guys. But I think that he's going to continue to, as long as he can ride the Ye train, he's going to like push that 2024. He did say before, like, Ye was even on Tucker. So this is like back in September, I think. Right. He was like, if DeSantis runs, we'll gripe him. We'll wage a griper war against DeSantis. So I think he's going to force himself into like the political arena, like no matter what is happening, even if it's just to harass DeSantis. So I don't know. We'll see. We'll see what happens there. It's hard to predict with Nick.
It seems like he could potentially get back on the Trump train, but it does seem hard to see him supporting DeSantis. Like you said, he could start groiping or trolling him for attention and try to pull himself into that conversation. But you can't really see him supporting a guy like DeSantis, I would imagine. Am I right with that?
Oh yeah, he said that he would rather a Democrat win. If he's like, if that's the consequence of my actions of griping DeSantis, like basically I'm fine with it. Because the way he explains it is that he's not a Republican voter. No. He's a Trump voter. Now he's going to be a Ye voter. And if, we can't have some Nazi fascist running, then like he's not going to be a voter. And that just is what it is. And it's actually a pretty common theme. Like I met several people like that who they're actually working in politics, or like they're not working like in elected capacities, but they're working with these groups that are like working alongside politicians. And a lot of them are like, yeah, I don't vote, don't care. That's not what I'm here for. Like, you're really just there to watch the world burn, right? Like that's your priority. If there's nobody that's going to help you make that agenda, what's the point in voting?
They want to accelerate.
Yeah.
So that kind of leads into the next question. What do you think Nick Fuentes actually wants in a long-term sense? He's not really looking for a political career so much probably as growing his audience and his influence and waiting for things to burn down as a result?
It is so funny. It's like you watched a show with me this morning. Okay, so so keep in mind, he's 24 years old, right? So he's like already like going through it emotionally, because that's like you're trying to figure out what you want to do with your life in general then. Mm-hmm. But he's now having a life crisis where he's like, so tired of the show. I'm tired of coming on here and just monologuing. You know how I feel. Jews are bad. Everybody's bad. Ugh. And he's like, what am I going to do with my life? So he's also wondering what he's going to do with his life. He's not quite sure. He's really, poor Nick. He's having this hard time right now.
I watch these old clips of me from like 5 years ago when I first started doing the show, and I'm getting into it and all that. And now I don't know if this is just my personality, or maybe this happens to everybody. I don't know what it is, but I feel like I've reached this point of resignation where I'm like, what more is there to be said?
But I think if he tried to quit the show, I think he would be extremely depressed, because it's like, it's addictive. You get the live stream going, you get all the comments, and it's like not just the money, but like the validation from people. And he's not getting that validation in person. I mean, when he's with Ye, I'm sure he is, but people are throwing shit at him when he goes in and out, like he's not. People aren't sending him super chats in person. So I think that he'll probably do the show as long as possible. I don't know if he would run for politics or like run for office in politics. I think he would probably like to work in politics or work, on someone's campaign, or when they're in office, work alongside them, or even work in a lobbying group. I think that would probably be more his thing, because he's just so toxic. I mean, there's like 3 toxic things left in this country, and he's one of them. So I'm not sure he could be the face of something.
He made some comments on one of his live streams recently, and we included those comments on our episode on Nick Fuentes that we did recently as well, about how he thinks that maybe what he might want to go do is become Charles Manson at some point and have a group of girls following him around. And of course he said it's a joke, because he says everything's a joke, and that's just how that guy works. But it definitely seems like the kind of thing he might be better suited for than any kind of normal mainstream political career.
I think there are many people who would agree that he would probably be a good cult leader.
Yes,
so,
he is one of them. He definitely thinks so. And, he goes into detail. And like I said, we got an episode on this, so check it out if you want to hear him say it.
One of my biggest regrets is I did not go to AFPAC, because you had to pay by giving Nick your bank account information.
What?
And so I didn't go. You couldn't use crypto.
Wow.
And I was like, and then, this is like 2021. It's like Patrick Casey is on his show. He's like, Nick's a Fed. And I'm like, fuck, I was at the fucking Capitol. And then if I do this, and I'm like, nobody's going to believe me when I'm...
Yeah.
You're going to end up on the no-fly list yourself.
Right. Fuck.
I regret it. I went on it.
That is amazing that he would have the chutzpah to ask that question. And it's amazing that people actually went for it. Like,
you could also send an envelope of cash, but it was like $200. Do you know what I mean? And I'm like, what the fuck is this? He's like, no paying at the door. And then, of course, the Nazis came in afterwards. We're like, well, you're a girl. You probably could have gotten in. I'm like, not a risk I was willing to take. I mean, like, if I hadn't been undercover, I would have taken that risk. But like, it's like, it's too many layers. So like,
yeah.
Why do I have a feeling that the IRS would have some real interesting questions for that boy if they ran across him? I mean, envelopes full of cash at the door of his events. Oh, that's legit. I'm sure he's tracking every bit of that money and writing it all down and filing it all on his tax returns.
Mm-hmm.
right.
Damn,
Absolutely. Of course.
Yeah. We're going to have to see if he bought a laundromat at some point.
Well, he did just buy that condo in Chicago. I mean, fuck.
True.
Yeah.
Paid for it somehow. I mean, super chats aren't necessarily going to cover all of it. So envelopes with hundreds of dollars in them from AFPAC just actually might.
Right? I'm really hoping he does one here, because CPAC is here again next month, in like less than a month now. And I'm like, oh man, I really hope he tries to do it here. That'll be... I mean, I obviously will not be able to get in, but hopefully someone will be able to get in.
Yeah, there's going to be a sign up with your face on it.
You're on the list now.
Yeah.
Even CPAC, I didn't even buy a ticket. I just reserved a room at the hotel that's hosting it, because I'm like, you can't kick me out of the hotel. You can kick me out of the event, but you can't kick me out of the hotel.
That's great.
Yeah, and that leads to another great question. Why do you think the MAGA movement is so prone to accepting or embracing violence? Most people on the left aren't holding up Charles Manson as any kind of role model for anything, really.
Because for the past 30 years, talk radio has told the right that everybody that is their enemy is a literal demon. They are monsters who want to hurt their children, hurt their families, and strip them of their right to live. And you can only say that so many times before people are going to do something about it. I mean, January 6th, if you truly are a believer, completely makes sense, right? I mean, is that not what you do when the government steals an election?
No, makes total sense.
Yeah. And that is, I mean, I spent my childhood hearing that Bill Clinton was the Antichrist. And then Obama was going to be the Antichrist later, and and there was going to be the mark of the beast, and we were going to be persecuted for our beliefs, and we were going to be ostracized from society because, especially evangelicals, like that is like what gives you life is your religious persecution, which doesn't exist in this country for Christians. And so I think, like you can really trace this back through talk radio and smaller time local people saying stuff that then catches on and is taken from community to community, either through the radio or through John Birch Society meetings or members of the John Birch Society speaking, at local Republican events and pushing the same rhetoric. And then that rhetoric becomes a national level thing. And then fast forward 20 years and Tucker Carlson saying the same shit on television.
Right.
So that's a lot of what it is.
Yeah, I can see what you're saying with the idea that it's a pipeline from talk radio. I remember when I was younger, I used to kind of listen to that stuff a lot. And one of the guys that I remember, we all talk about Rush Limbaugh being where a lot of it started, but G. Gordon Liddy, the former Nixon fixer, also had a talk show, and he used to talk about things like headshotting federal agents on his show. And
I didn't know that.
Yes, he did.
Oh, wow.
Yes. And of course, it wasn't ever his gun collection because, of course, he was a convicted felon, so he couldn't have one. So he would talk all the time about Mrs. Liddy's gun collection. Yeah. That was Liddy. And he would talk all the time. This was 94. And Bill Clinton was in the middle of all of that. And he was talking about jackbooted federal thugs, quoting Wayne LaPierre from the NRA at the time. And he was like, aim for the head when they come to your door, saying things that are very similar to a lot of the rhetoric that you hear these days on the extreme right about the FBI. Definitely.
Yeah.
So it definitely seems like things in the last few years have gotten much more dangerous from a rhetoric standpoint, because you're going to get somebody who hears this stuff and decides they're going to go off and do it. And that seems to be happening more and more often lately. Do you think this is something, how has this changed since you did your undercover work? Do you think it's kind of cranked up a little bit in the last few years, or?
I think it's definitely gotten worse. I remember the first time I heard anybody talk about CRT was in April 2021 at the Trump Doral, was like a Women for America First event. And this woman gave a long speech about how Democrats are using CRT to make your children more susceptible to child sex trafficking, which is like obviously like deranged. It makes no sense. But everybody was like, okay, I see where you're coming from. I'm like, okay, I don't. And at the time, the CRT rhetoric is not what it is. Like if I even went through and looked on Twitter and like before like February 2021, like nobody's talking about this. And then, now CRT is like kind of the end of the world. And it's funny because there's definitely like articles from extremist sites about like CRT or the idea of it from like 2018. So we've just now taken all of this rhetoric. The way that mainstream Republicans talk about trans people is how Christopher Cantwell used to talk about trans people after we shunned him from society, know? Yeah. So it's definitely, I think, continually gotten worse.
Isn't CRT kind of a way for some of them to essentially say that if you're anti-white, it's your anti-white agenda is bad, and they're not gonna say it in that explicit terms, but it's become a buzzword that can be, we don't like your diversity and inclusion, but also we think you're anti-white, and that's a problem. And that used to be really fringe. It used to be Chris Cantwell, and now it's been mainstreamed.
Yeah. As I'm like writing and compiling and going through the history of some of these white nationalists that I met undercover, looking at their posts, looking at their blog entries, it is literally, diversity is a cancer. And that is, not far off from what we're hearing mainstream people say now.
Yeah, definitely.
It is interesting to think of it in terms of the hard right knew that Charlottesville was very bad for them. And some people warned them, said, don't go. This is too much. It's going to blow up. And it did. And now it just seems like they've gotten smarter. It seems like they're saying the same things, but they've figured out a way to not immediately blow up their movement. And I don't know. It's scary. And it seems to be working.
Because you would think January 6th would be like toxic in any capacity. But I think Nick Fuentes, Richard Spencer, and the Tiki Torch March. Not even Unite the Right, but the Tiki Torch March the night before. I think those are the only three things. Like, you have to draw an association to these three things, one of these three things, if you want to do political damage to somebody at this point. Because, like, marching underneath the gallows, chanting "Hang Mike Pence" as you storm the Capitol to overturn an election isn't enough, right? Like, it's just not enough.
Yeah, it didn't seem like that really hurt QAnon much. It was interesting in that Mother Jones piece that Ali Braylon wrote, that he was talking about, you were at these events and all of these people are saying, oh, you have to go to a car with a Proud Boy. You can't go out there alone. And I mean, you talk about this conspiratorial thinking, and we know that a lot of the Antifa stuff is really just, it's this online scare tactics of, oh, the Antifa super soldiers are coming to get us. But they believe it. And I feel like for January 6th, even though there was all that mixed messaging of, was it Trump supporters? Was it Antifa? I feel like there was enough confusion that I don't know that it hurt any of them. I don't know. It didn't seem to hurt Trump. It didn't really seem to hurt QAnon. It didn't seem to hurt the hard right. It's like it was dispersed enough that everybody kind of said, well, it was bad. And then they just sort of forgot about it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which is insane.
Yeah. I mean, it wasn't even my first riot, but it was definitely the weirdest one I've ever been to. There was so much hate on January 6th, like, just around me. I've never been, because, like, I've, like, in Baltimore after Freddie Gray died, that was, like, justified rage. Right. It wasn't like my, sloppy president can't win an election because he sucks. Like, it wasn't. And most people that I knew, like, lost the election because they're white nationalists. Like, they don't give a shit. Yeah, you guys go storm the Capitol. That's great for me, Right. Yeah, it is just, at the time, there's no way. If you would ask me January, 7th, fast forward 2 years, what do you think will happen? This complete ignoring of this event and just letting people run for office and do whatever they want. Who cares? That is not the answer I would have had. It was, very bizarre.
Yeah, it definitely seems like it hasn't really hurt most of them. A lot of these people ended up getting reelected. A lot of these people ended up getting, elected to Congress in the, midterms. You've got your guys like even Mike Flynn, who was directly in the middle of all of this, and doesn't seem to have hurt him one bit, even though he's now kind of pivoted to non-QAnon believer since he got back. He's sort of playing that off, but we don't really believe that. You saw Flynn and his supporters at these events firsthand. How do you think it squares to have him kind of playing this down on Twitter versus what you saw at these experiences with not just Flynn, but the people who go to these things and kind of think quite highly of the good general, as it were?
So I think Flynn is a grifter with no real compass, not like moral compass, but like belief compass. I do not believe he has consistency other than himself. Like, that is his priority. But when he is like, oh, there is no QAnon. What is Q? I don't, like, oh, what is this?
I, Jack Flynn,
do solemnly swear
that
I will support and defend
the
Constitution of the United States
against
all enemies, foreign and domestic.
That
I will bear true faith and allegiance to the same.
That
I take this obligation freely. Without any mental reservation. Or purpose of evasion. And that I will well and faithfully. Discharge the duties. Of the office on which I am about to enter. So help me God. Where we go one, we go all. God bless America.
Everybody goes, he has to say that because the people in power can't just come out. And so it's like this, like, okay, well, you can never fucking win because, what are you doing? You're just walking in circles. And so that's how they'll justify it with the famous people who want to deny it. Now, of course, they do this whole thing where they're like, there's no QAnon. I know Q. And I know Anons, but I don't know. But then, I would see, I saw Lynn Wood one time. And he led this, we were in a gymnasium, basically. And it was a very small event. And he's like, leading and rallying everybody up. And he's like, the FBI says the QAnon people are terrorists. And he's like, I don't know what QAnon is, but sounds like they mean Trump supporters, and we're not terrorists. And it's like, okay, well, you almost really slipped up right there. You know what I mean? Like, that's what they do, is they just say, they got to say what they got to say so they can keep their positions, keep their platforms. And
right.
Did you see Flynn a lot? Was he at a lot of events? Was he talked about a lot?
Oh my God, Flynn is the only person more places than Flynn is Lindell. Like, that's it. That's the only guy. Michael Flynn is everywhere, and he loves attention. Like, if you ever want to meet Michael Flynn and you see some batshit like QAnon event is coming to your town, go hang out at like a fancy hotel lobby bar. Okay, and I'm almost going to guarantee you he'll be there. And you can take a photo with him. There'll be a crowd of people around him, and they'll be eating it up for hours. He loves it.
So this is what they do now. This is how they make money. This is their whole thing.
It's like a circus. It's a traveling circus. That's what it is.
Wow.
Did you see a lot of the same people like going on tour with these groups, and week after week they're always there?
So for QAnon stuff, so I'm 34. I was like 32 when I was doing this. So fascists were like my age, but QAnon people are generally like older. And the QAnon events are extremely expensive. Fascism, very financially accessible. Okay. QAnon, I was dropping like $1,000 sometimes to get into these events, just for the event, just for the ticket.
Ooh.
Never mind the hotel and the flight. People would be like, "Oh, this is our family vacation." And it's like, they're like 8-year-olds are like, "We wanted to go to Disney." Well, it's QAnon conference now. Sorry. So it's like, skewed much older. So the people I would like really like talk to would be the vendors that I would see in like the media. And so that's like who I would hang out with. And it was, it's like, so there's certain like low level live streamers who's like made a career for following, one certain little circuit around the country. And that's what they cover all the time now. I got to a point where I was like, I could probably given you Mike Lindell's speeches in my sleep, because you say the same stuff, all of the time. And a lot of them are like that. So it's a lot of just repeat. Once you've been to one, you've been to them all, more or less. I actually primarily didn't even go. I would buy these, like the most expensive ticket I could get, have the VIP access. And because for some things I knew media, so I go hang out in the media area, or otherwise, like, who cares? Like the same speeches, I'm here to go sit at the bar and wait to talk to the people who are at these events,
Right. These boomers are just getting rinsed. That's really something amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I mean, who's really got the money for the most part to be spending this level of cash on QAnon conferences? Really, it's boomers of a certain age.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
I didn't realize, I think, just how much they were charging to be a part of this movement. And it's interesting that, you can tell that they're pitching it to different crowds just by the amount they're charging, that fascism doesn't cost a whole lot of money to participate in because it's, for the most part, younger.
Yeah.
And you can't afford to spend what it would cost to have a meet and greet with Mike Flynn on the same level.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
So you have a quote on one of your Substack pieces that's kind of a play on Ben Shapiro's favorite line about feelings don't care about your facts. In this growing right-wing conspiracy world, it really speaks to the hypocrisy of all of this, because they love to claim that they're the truth tellers, but most of the time they don't have the facts on their side. So my question is, how many of the people on the right, you mentioned Flynn being a grifter, how many of the rest of them do you think realize that they're lying? And how many of these people actually believe this?
I think among the upper echelon, it's kind of like a mixed bag, right? Where some people just want to make money. Some people want to make money, and they're also like fascists or just conspiracy riddled, like brain people. And like, that's great because it's really cool when all of your interests align. And other people just do not care about anything except themselves. And that's like the path that they have taken because they realize it's an easy grift. I mean, like Lindell to me is like an example of a very like clear, true believer, because he is operating. I mean, he is hemorrhaging money, and he will not stop. He cannot stop. I don't know that he's capable of stopping. He's like the biggest example of someone who is completely all in. But among like the regular people, I think that a lot of these people Some are curious. And, obviously there's like a self-selection, especially with QAnon because it's so expensive. But I think a lot of the people are like true believers in what they're following, even if their leaders aren't.
You've touched on this some, but I am curious if you have more to say just in terms of the white nationalists in general know the QAnon stuff is crazy and the people are kind of nutty. Could you break down what benefit they see in dealing with these people and placating them? Is it about the money? Is it about they think it's just a way to grow their own movement? What are they getting out of it, I guess?
So I flew to Portland to go on a picnic date with a white nationalist watching a race riot. And that riot got canceled because the police convinced the Proud Boys to move to a Kmart parking lot. And there they flipped a bus upside down and tear gassed themselves. So we did not watch that. But the disdain this man had for these Proud Boys from moment one. I mean, he's like, look at them in the parking lot. This is your job. You're supposed to be the foot soldiers. You sacrificed your bones and bodies to, support the Aryan agenda. And what are you doing? Andy was like tweeting about it. And he's like, Andy is an idiot. Who cares about this guy? Fuck him. And so that's kind of like the same thing with QAnon, right? Where it's like, you've got these people and they're like crazy, like, oh, let's make jokes about how crazy they are. But they serve a purpose. And that purpose is when it comes time to storm the Capitol, this guy, he would say that we were indoor people and these people were outdoor people. He's like, we're not going inside the Capitol. That's not our job. Somebody's got to do it. And so, yeah, you need bodies. You need votes. You need cover. A lot of these people, if you're looking at the QAnon stuff, they're going to be already so conspiracy prone. And if you can find common ground with them on certain conspiracies, that it's going to make them kind of look the other way when you say other stuff. So, yeah, I think a lot of it is just you need more people in the movement.
That is a great breakdown.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess if you think about it and think about a lot of the people that were at the Capitol on January 6th, and they kind of look harmless. In general, you think of a white nationalist and you have a certain look, and it's usually intimidating and kind of on purpose. But when you've got people that are QAnon believers and they're in their 60s and 70s and they're retired and maybe they got a bad leg and think, well, they're just kind of old and harmless. But if they've been fed all this nonsense and have been kind of activated to go do this thing, they're not so harmless. And we saw that. It's almost like it's easier to dismiss it because it wasn't the tiki torches that were going in the Capitol. I think the response, if it had been that, would have been a whole lot different. But yeah,
that's very interesting phrasing that you had about these are inside people and these are outside people. And that was something a lot of us kind of, I think, suspected when we saw like there was a group that was sort of pushing it and they were expecting, the dummies, or as I was thinking of it at the time, you're the ones that are going to go get yourselves in trouble over all of this, not us. Is that something that was widely sort of disseminated amongst the leadership end? How much of that is intentional on the part of the leadership?
So I can't speak to like behind closed doors opinions of like Patrick Casey or Nick Fuentes or Alex Jones. These are not people, these are not people that I like interact with directly, though Casey is friends with many people that I knew. So I really can't speak to their state of mind, but what I can say is that among people who are like not named, not that I'm not naming them, but like they're just nameless. Like if I told you their names, you'd be like, I don't know who the hell that is. And I'd be like, well, they're working with Fidesz and they're working with Congress, right? So like people of like some importance. That is like none of them are going to pick up a gun. None of them are like going to go have a fist fight, but they're very okay with somebody else doing it. And that's like the role. Like that is, the role they want is to be the person who's helping write laws and who's helping, kind of transition us from where we are to like an early stages of Nazi Germany. And that's directly stated as the goal. So.
You brought up, just talking there, Fidesz, which is the ruling party in Hungary. And I am curious how much Hungary and Orban and that illiberalism, or illiberalism is kind of a nice phrasing for authoritarian. Mm-hmm. Hungary's government has not gone about seizing power overnight. It's been this gradual removal of norms, and they've co-opted the media and the justice system and all this. And so it is a form of takeover. Is this something that you heard people talk about a lot? Is it kind of just in the background?
The group I was hanging out with, the executive director, flew out to Budapest to cover our national election for Hungarian state-sponsored television through his connections with high-up politicians in Fidesz. So,
wow.
Yeah, that says a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's definitely a little damning, I think, when you look at it. Yeah.
Yeah.
So we've got the 2024 primaries and general election on the horizon. The money is about to start flowing. The GOP strategists, provocateurs, and even some of these extremist outsiders are going to try and impose their will on the proceedings. Do you imagine a lot of your work is going to be related to the various political campaigns, or do you see it as kind of adjacent to your extremist coverage, but not really related?
I think for the presidential campaign, I was not, as far as I'm aware, I don't know anybody who is potentially involved with that. But people that I knew were directly involved with Congress. I mean, a couple years ago, what year are we in? 2023? So 2021, there was a America First caucus that came out. It was extremely racist and nativist. It was, Marjorie Taylor Greene and Gosar were said to be involved. My group, of people that I knew that wrote it. So they're already, Matt Gaetz, they've got Joe Kent, who lost, but is still saying he's going to run again in the future. So they've got their claws in. And so I'm optimistic that some of the work that I did will be used to both, kind of counteract some of these bad actors, but also to help the general public understand. Because I think people are not really grasping the depth of these connections. Between sitting people in Congress and white nationalism. I don't know why they're not understanding, but for some reason it seems to be a surprise over and over.
It is very hard to get a man to understand something when his salary depends on him not understanding it. It's a quote from, Upton Sinclair in The Jungle, and that just keeps coming up the more we do this. That there's a lot of people whose salary seems to depend on them not understanding the scope of what's going on. And it really seems like they have kind of moved the line quite a bit down from, the Overton window, as Nick Fuentes is always talking about, seems to be shifted quite a bit in that direction. What would you say are your biggest concerns about the right-wing movement going forward?
All.
I know, it's kind of a broad one.
I don't know. I'm very concerned about the rhetoric around trans people, gay people, and how quickly it seems to have escalated. I think maybe faster than anything else, and certainly with more damaging, I think, consequences, because it's such a marginalized group already with no real support infrastructure that can stand up to anything institutional. And so I think that is maybe my top concern.
Did the hate directed at trans people feel genuine to you, or does it feel contrived? Do they really hate them, or is this just another cheap political tool?
They really hate them. That is my read on it, is that it is not, I never heard it discussed as a tactic for its own sake, but as something, and I think it's, obviously I think primarily driven out of not understanding and confusion and fear, and fearing things you don't understand, and trying to make the world, very, very simple. And so I think that's a lot of it, but it's a very real hatred for many people, a very real disgust. And I don't know how you combat that, because it's, I just don't know, because I think because it is genuine, it's a little bit more infectious. It's easier maybe to make other people feel the same way.
Yeah, because that's something that's just never, at least to me personally, made a whole lot of sense. And when I saw them starting to go in really hard on trans people a couple of years ago, that became the big boogeyman that it became clear that they were really going to try and push. It was kind of get real. How many people even know somebody who's trans outside of, certain circles? How do you think you're going to win an election with this? And while I don't think it won them any elections to bash on trans people, at least not in the most recent midterms, they definitely hardened up their base to that issue, and they got people just rabidly against that. I'm really a little surprised at how well it worked, and it just seems like this isn't an issue that affects a whole lot of people, especially not their people, yet they seem to have done what they did with Antifa, where they got everybody to think this is around every corner waiting to come get you. This is something that's going to happen. These people are coming to get your kids. These people are coming to get, your sons and daughters and make them your daughters and sons. And so you need to fight back to all of this. And it's really frightening how well they are able to get their messaging into these people's heads and how quickly it seems to take with this.
Yeah.
So what do you see that you're optimistic about going forward?
So, I mean, like, I think at the end of the day, it's always important to remember there's more of us than there are of them. And as you just said, I mean, like, the midterms were devastating, and, like, that particular rhetoric didn't work. And, I don't know if it'll work in the future, but there's certainly time for us to stop it. And through doing this, I've met various reformers who, like, I mean, some people, like, leave the movement, in quotes, and they are just like, I was very famous before in my circles, and I want to be very famous as like a person speaking against those circles. And it's like, they're full of shit, whatever. But, there's other people who are like very genuine, and they're like doing stuff to make the world a better place, to, raise their children in a way that does not ever like intersect with the way that they were before. And, we're helping pull other people out and seeing that. I think, de-radicalization is not a process for me. I don't have the patience for it. I can't help someone, with that. But it's, I think, been great to meet so many people who are involved in it and seeing how not just de-radicalization from like fascism or Nazism, but like pulling people out of like conspiracy theories, like pulling people out of QAnon and shit like that.
Yeah. And to that, like you mentioned earlier on that you were raised evangelical, that your dad goes to the megachurch, that they're very kind of bought into this. What do you say if you're somebody who's in a similar situation to that? They want to love their parents, they love their parents, but they really are having a hard time with this considering these personal beliefs. What kind of advice would you give these people that are trying to deal with this?
It's so hard. I mean, it's like, for me, my dad thinks Antifa started in the Capitol. And I was there, and he wasn't there. So that's, it's a very strange dynamic. I think if you got to talk to him less, talk to him less. My preference is to preserve the relationship in some capacity. So if your parents won't listen when you say don't talk about politics, if your parents won't listen when you say don't talk about Trump, maybe just talk to them less. That's what you got to do to stay sane. Because it's, for me, I'd rather if something happens to my dad's older, like, I would rather we talk a little less than like we talked all the time and fought, or like we just didn't talk at all.
Right.
Like it's kind of like how I feel about it. So I think that is maybe, and I think a lot of these people, and especially I think it's a little easier for me to answer the question because I really just don't have a good answer for that, because it's a lot of people who do this kind of work do it for personal reasons. And so I think that many of us have experienced that people that you care about the most are least likely to listen to you,
Yeah, I can very much relate. I think we all know someone.
Yeah. And it's, like my parents will never listen to me about any of this shit. I don't even try anymore. So I don't know that I have like the most professional ways in that regard. But, if your parents do not talk to you, or if it is just super bleak, I will say a lot of these QAnon types would meet me and they would be like, you remind me of my daughter who's about your age, who does not talk to me anymore. And so like, your parents probably miss you quite a bit, and they're definitely talking to strangers about it. And it's a common thread that people can bond over. And I, like for whatever amount of hope that gives people, where it's like, your parents like do not hate you. They've not, like moved on. Most people are very deeply sad over it.
And I think the reality probably is that if you stop talking to them, they're very likely to get worse. And like we gave you a very difficult question, and there's no easy answer, and no one alive has an easy answer. But you can at least say this thing or that thing is going to make it worse. And if you abandon them, sometimes you have to. Sometimes you just can't for your own mental health, and you have your own kids. You have to make tough choices sometimes. But if you don't have to do that, and you don't want to see them get worse, then at least send them a card on their birthday. Tell them you love them sometimes. maybe they can get pulled out of it, maybe they can't, but breaking all contact, it's probably going to end poorly. And it's awful, and it's an awful choice, but that's where we're at.
Yeah, I agree.
So can you tell us anything about what you're working on now and what you'd like to work on in the future?
Well, I've got an article. If anybody wants to publish it, who is listening, please immediately contact me about my time undercover. Kind of detailing this group I was with, and then, doing a memoir or whatever. But kind of just staying here. Once this main article is out, it gets a lot easier because a lot of stuff branches off from there. But like I said, a lot of people that I knew are nobodies to the general public, even though they are doing a lot of stuff behind the scenes. So I'd really like to work more on exposing some of that. That's my goal.
Do you still, I know when you first published this, you got a lot of backlash. Do you still feel like you have to prove yourself to people? Is that kind of still an issue? Or do you think right now it's just somebody just take this article and go with it? Or is there really like actual, pushback on you?
Like from the media or from like random people?
Well, to some extent, I know that you caught at least a little bit of skepticism and criticism from people who were, ostensibly on the left about how could you do this? How could somebody, actually do this kind of work if they weren't somehow at least a little sympathetic towards it, which I think honestly is horseshit. People go undercover all the time to do any number of things, but people did push back on that. And have you still seen that kind of thing happening, or does it happen less now? Do you think people have sort of figured it out?
It happens less now, but only because I've gone viral, but not for specific things related to going undercover. It'll happen again. It'll happen when this article comes out, and then it'll happen when the memoir comes out. It'll just be a cycle of forever. The best part about that was some of the people, especially on Twitter, some of the bigger accounts were people who literally knew me in real life, but forgot they knew me. Or they were people, or they were people who I was in contact with when I was undercover. And they knew. That would be hey, I'm coming to your city. I see you're running this Antifa account for this city, and I'm coming here for a race riot. Let's be in contact, And then all of a sudden they're like, this person is literally a Nazi. And I'm like, I wasn't a Nazi when I messaged you, and you messaged me back. I don't know what we're doing here. Oh. So, people just want to bitch and moan about anything. So yeah, I'm not. I mean, God, I was talking to so many journalists. There are so many journalists right now. If it wasn't for the fact that most of my story is audio, any number of journalists could just scoop me on everything, but they can't prove it because it's all audio. I've talked to so many people. Yeah, that was wild. People were calling people on the left were calling people that I know in real life to bitch about me, which is wow. Actually, they were calling journalists who know me and giving them the third degree about me. And people are, because I live in DC, of course I know journalists. I'm from here, I know people in media because in politics, it's who lives here. Right. Why I didn't do stuff here, because I would have met people at these events who I would have known. They would have been I remember when you were a libertarian, So yeah, it was such a bizarre experience. Very, very bizarre.
That is crazy.
Yeah, not entirely surprising, but definitely why? What are you getting out of this? What's
right?
Maybe just like you said, that people just love to bitch. And honestly, we all have the memories of Goldfish at this point. So you're who? You did what? Oh, well, you're just a fascist now. Well, as someone who listens and reads and watches plenty of fascist content, it does not automatically turn you fascist.
No.
It's crazy, but
it's weird.
Which I don't know, if it did, I think we'd be in a really bad position.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
I think they're kind of telling on themselves when they say you can't possibly listen to this stuff and not turn into a fascist. That seems kind of a little bit really? Maybe you can't.
Right. Yeah. Good point.
Well, hey, thank you, Amanda. We really appreciate your time today. This was great. Awesome.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
It. Nice to meet you.
Great talking to you.
Take care.
Nice meeting you.
Thanks for listening to the Did Nothing Wrong podcast. If you want to hear more, you can go to didnothingwrongpod.com. You can also follow us on Twitter at James, the word 4, and the letter M, all one word, and Grizza BJJ, GRZA BJJ, as well as DNW Pod. Thanks again for tuning in, and remember, everyone mentioned did nothing wrong.